through the sequence of things that I've listed. I had about 20. I won't get through that many. But the two dreams, I call it, concerning different things. Well, the first, and I think we might begin with the sense of the feminine, that the ecological perspective as a nurturing feminine aspect, the other is a creation of and is sustained by a certain aggression that has so far characterized what is referred to frequently as our patriarchal heritage, or at least it has that aspect. Now, as regards the earth, the one considers the earth as resources to be exploited. The other, the earth, is a sacred community to be communed with, to be enjoyed, to be sustained by, but in the context of sacred community. Progress. In the one case, it's human progress at the expense of the planet. In the other case, it is progress for the total life community, for the trees and the birds, as well as for the humans. As regards reality and value, the one is anthropocentric, the other is biocentric. As regards energy, the one is high entropy, that is, the gross national product must rise. It must activate more and more energy. The other has minimal entropy. As regards the legal establishment, the first is built, our common law tradition, on the values of the human person. This must include the values of natural objects and establish a sense of the primacy of the commons, which is the air, the water, the rivers, the life systems. These are our commons that belong to us all, and we must have legal processes that protect these. We don't presently have the legal processes. Medicine now tends to be a branch of chemistry, or a branch of surgery and so forth. And that is, it's not that some of this is inadequate treatment, but there is a tendency toward, at least. The communications. The one has control of the communications, which obviously is just drowning us in a deluge of advertising, the newspapers, through the mail. It bounces off our eardrums constantly. It's the television. In one program that I sat down and counted once, there were 35 advertisements presented in 1 hour. In 1 hour program. Fragmenting this thing. You cannot endure a 5-minute interval without plunging toward the consumer process. And on the other hand, of course, the ecological vision, or this vision, has minimal presence. It is used at times in a token manner by some of the enterprises. And sometimes, sincerely enough, education. Education presently is rather much as preparation for a job. I suggest that education, and in the other context, would be to educate for roles, not for jobs, but for the role, that a person has a role to fulfill in the story, in the life pattern, and their life story, and their success or failure is how they fulfill a role. Now, science. In the one case, it is the subservient instrument of the establishment. In the other, it's a revelatory experience. As regards international relations, In the one case, it is allied to the military. In the other case, there is peace among peoples through peace with the earth. As regards the social orientation, in the one case, there is the capitalist, the right-left tension, opposition, but both agree on the primacy in human affairs of exploiting the planet. They're in total agreement. And in this case, it's the one way in which, particularly in developing countries, they can get beyond the right-left tension, because the relationship to the earth and the proper functioning of the earth has to be a primary concern for everyone. Now, the next one is the last one, and it is a difficult one to articulate, but in the light of what I've said, you'll probably understand it and appreciate it as perhaps our most difficult thing to manage. And that is, as regards religious cultural orientation, the exploitative dream may be closer to our traditions than the ecological orientation. We are, in a sense, the marginals, the ones in possession, and perhaps are, in some manner at least, close. And this is it's not so clear, but in some sense, at least, it can be considered so, even though there is that compassion for the poor and the effort at justice and peace. It still is a justice and peace that is that has an alien relationship with the earth. It's a justice and peace within the existing order. The bishops in the states, the bishop's letter tries to establish an economy, and they say that you judge an economy by what it does for and to people. My answer to that is not the primary way in which you judge an economy, a human economy. You judge a human economy primarily by the extent to which it coordinates and enhances earth economy. The earth itself is an economy, and the extent to which we establish this is important. One other thing that I would say is that has to do with the archetypal figures. I think that we belong to what one day may be considered the heroic age of the environmental development. We might identify the first, there are a number of great personalities of the last century, and perhaps Aldo Leopold in the 40s of this century, but perhaps Rachel Carson, whose book Silent Spring was published in 1962, was, as in certain sense, the matriarch of what has followed. There are a good many outstanding people. We are creating our own archetypal figures that are providing these first foundations upon which a total future will rest. And that, again, is what is important. I mentioned the sense of ultimacy, and we think of that as regards ourselves. But what is, in a certain sense, has to be a greater concern for us, for any generation, is the children. And not only the children, our children, and their children, but for all future children. What they will have has to pass through us. What does not pass through us, they will not have. So that it is something that the existing order a person has to figure, must have a contempt for the children of the world and for all future generations. There must be an utter, it wouldn't be contempt, but just total disregard or such self-serving that there is an unwillingness to admit even the most basic of human feelings, which is a feeling for the children. So that when we consider that we are reinventing the human, we are in a sense also reinventing the earth. We're reinventing the life context, as was mentioned earlier, whereas formerly humans lived within the natural world, now the natural world lives within the human. And to establish this, and we are the transitional generation for this. And that is what is so important. And why we have to develop that sensitivity. We have come out of this age of smashing things. For some reason, people were unable to accept the limitation, the resistances, the creative resistances, say, in our transportation and the things we did. And we could create these awesome machines to tear the mountains apart and all that, or to put ourselves into aircraft and fly from here to there with utmost ease and all of that, but all the while draining and destroying. So the adjustment, one of the things I think that we need to think about and to be aware of, and I think it could help considerably, is to appreciate that role, that transitional role, and that what we do is just so infinitely important. And what we can do is not to carry out the details of a program, but at least to set the process on to a proper direction with a valid estimate of the order of magnitude of the task that we are involved in, and also with what might be considered a sense that this is being carried through and will be carried through in a certain fulfillment. And the other, there's just one other last remark, is that again, it is not our work particularly, it is the work of the total Earth community. And so that there are those resources, they're the resources of the 14.5 billion years that are back of us. And all those forces are working for this moment of transition of the total human process, or the total Earth process, and the Earth itself. If we look back at the great moments of threatened dissolution in the past, there is reason to believe that it will be carried through to the future. Now, there's just one thing that I would like to read for you. Would you go in and get a copy of the new story in there, the pamphlet on the table in there called The New Story? It's a piece that I wrote, and it was, I did it unconsciously. I wasn't conscious, but later I realized that it was modeled on the passage in St. Augustine's City of God that I like best. In other words, we are in the same moment of when St. Augustine wrote the City of God. When St. Augustine wrote the City of God, the Goths had destroyed Rome in the year 410. And the cry went up that the gods had been deserted because of the Christians, and therefore the gods had delivered Rome up for destruction. And with the fall of Rome, that was like obliterating all the resources of the civilized world at the time. It was an enormous experience for the people of that time. And Augustine sat down to write the answer, blaming it on the Christians, and he wrote the answer. It took him the greater part of the last years of his life were spent writing The City of God of Augustine. And this is what brought Western civilization into being in some sense. That is, was a transitional work granting a creative dynamism that was a great help for the Middle Ages. There's great difficulty in much of the work of Augustine, but he was one of the central persons, and that work is a central work in the survival of civilization as we know it. There is a passage there, I think it's the 11th chapter of the 5th book. The 5th book of the work is a favorite book. He wrote 10 books refuting the charges against the pagans, and then he wrote 4, 12 books, the origin of the two cities, the one built on love, the one built on hate, that their origin, their progression through time, and their ultimate destiny. It's a great thing, the two cities. They were not church and state exactly. It was just the city of goodness and the opposed city, and how they struggled through time and so forth. And he offered hope in a very desolate period. And he, in that sense, but he wrote a passage there about providence. The 5th book is concerned with fate, and it's a discussion of determinism and so forth. And this is on providence, that the divine, just a fantastic thing. And he goes through just like that introduction to the universe of a child, just like that went through all the orders of things. St. Augustine goes through an even greater extended order of the whole intricate disposition of things in the natural world and in the human world. And he ends up with a wonderful sense of hope. I suppose I'd read that somewhat in my mind. And it begins, if this, and this, and this, and this. Then he ends up, then we cannot believe, in other words, that if all these things are taken care of by divine providence, then certainly the destinies of humans and the fate of the people must certainly be within the encompassment of divine providence. This echoes some of that. As I say, I didn't do it, but I catch myself. As regard ending this piece of mine that I wrote on the new story. Thirdly, the basic mood of the future might well be one of confidence in the continuing revelation that takes place in and through the earth. If the dynamics of the universe from the beginning shaped the course of the heavens, lighted the sun, and formed the earth, if the same dynamism brought forth the continents, and seas, and atmosphere, if it awakened life in the primordial cell, and then brought into being the unnumbered variety of living beings, and finally brought humans into existence, and guided us safely through the turbulent centuries, there is reason to believe that the same guiding process is precisely